might have legal or political standing to challenge the results.
I see. Well, Doug Ducey, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, has been an ally of President Trump for a long time. This appeared to unravel last week, particularly Monday, when Ducey was signing that paperwork. There was actually a dramatic moment that was caught on video where it was the moment that Ducey was actually signing the documents. He received a phone call from President Trump. His ringtone, he joked with reporters a few months ago that he changed his ringtone for Trump to be "Hail to the Chief." So you could hear that, in the room there. There were cameras there. And I'll just cut to that clip here real quick. Okay. There we go. Yeah, he took his phone out there, and apparently Trump was very upset with him. Trump, just like in Georgia, Trump tried to get the governor to intervene, to stop the election, to change the results. Clearly, it wasn't successful. So this relationship that Trump and Ducey have had has really broken down now. And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Ducey has been a pretty, like a number of other Republican leaders, has been, well, sorry, not used to speaking live, I apologize. Ducey, on the one hand, has been a pretty consistent supporter of Trump. He also has a very different leadership style than a governor like Governor Brewer. He is kind of a quieter governor in general. We don't hear from him as much as we would hear from a governor like Brewer, but when he has spoken, it's generally been pretty consistent with whatever messaging Trump has going on pretty much every issue, literally up until this phone call. He previously had not, he went a long period after the election without making public appearances, and his comments on the election and COVID up until this point have been very consistent with Trump's statements. So this is the first public break, as far as I know, that we're aware of at this point.
Let me see. Lately, Ducey has been under fire from his base, in addition to Democrats, for his handling of the election and COVID. So he's in a tough spot politically. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Very much so. So first of all, he is a second-term governor. His term ends in 2022, and he's not eligible for re-election. We don't really know what his plans might be for after that, if he wants to continue in politics at a different level or not, but he is not eligible for re-election. So that puts his actions this year in kind of interesting light. He's not necessarily trying to support voters for the position he's in. In March, he kind of took an interesting step regarding COVID, where he was supporting the president's messaging, and for a while it seemed like he was the mayors, the city and county officials were taking most of the action on COVID, and he would either do something that echoed that or not really do something at a state level. The most active thing he did in spring was to kind of consolidate the state approach, and the action that he passed said that mayors could not take more action than he had taken. Previously, Tucson, Flagstaff, and Phoenix mayors had been making the decisions about like when restaurants closed and mask mandates and so forth. And after a couple rounds of that, he kind of took that over at the state level. He was at that point criticized pretty heavily by people who thought he wasn't going far enough as far as safety measures, but he was also criticized by what had previously been his base for doing anything at all. So it was an interesting situation. He doesn't necessarily have to be popular, but he kind of did, rather than being very proactive about COVID, or rather than not doing anything, which would have kept, either of those would have probably kept a group of people firmly on his side. He did kind of a half step, which alienated people on both ends of the spectrum regarding COVID, which has led, since spring, there has been a lot of petitions circulating online for his recall, ironically from both sides. So he's managed to unify the state on very little else but in calling for his recall.
We'll see. Now, Katie Hobbs is the Arizona Secretary of State. She's in charge of the elections, certification, all that. Arizona is unique in the country in that for a long time now, Arizona's had mail-in voting. So a lot of the issues that you see around the country, controversy, states are having to create out of nowhere a mail-in system. You haven't quite seen that in Arizona because it's just such a part of the state. So now with COVID happening, that definitely puts Arizona in a better position because there already was a lot of mail-in voting. So
Absolutely.
Katie Hobbs, though, received some threats, and she really got a lot of trouble, from people. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, well, and I'm a little bit more aware of it at the county level, which was an effort run by County Recorder Adrian Fuentes with Secretary of State Katie Hobbs' support.
And Fuentes is the county recorder for Maricopa County, which is Phoenix.
Yeah, for Maricopa. Yeah, he was, and I don't know when his term ends. He was up until the election, and then I believe was not reelected. But they've been pretty consistent. My understanding is that Katie Hobbs has been very supportive of the county recorders in setting up safe elections. There's been a lot of concerns in Maricopa, especially about voting stations closing and things like that. So that was an ongoing concern before COVID. When COVID, as early as March, I began to be aware of efforts by the Maricopa County Recorder with the Secretary of Support State. There was concerns. There was a Maricopa level election in spring, and there was concerns looking forward to this fall's primaries and the general elections about having them safely with COVID. And there was virtual town halls, among other things. There was virtual town halls that the public could participate in and observe over the summer that Secretary of State Hobbs and Maricopa County Recorder Fuentes participated in. They had a lot of really good ideas. For example, they were talking about everything from the budget it would take to have enough sanitizer at poll stations, extending hours, all kinds of things, looking for ways to space out who would come and vote in person, looking at ways to expand mail-in voting. The town hall that I observed, they had just submitted, they wanted to basically mail out ballots automatically to all registered voters, whether or not they had requested them. And unfortunately, the state legislator shut that down. And I don't remember if the Arizona state legislature is Republican controlled. I do not remember hearing any commentary from Ducey at that point of support or denial or anything. But Secretary of State Hobbs was supporting trying to mail out in the county, working with the county recorders to automatically mail out ballots to all registered voters in an effort to reduce the impact on the polls, reduce traffic through them, reduce lines, increase accessibility, and reduce COVID exposure. And unfortunately, most of the efforts that they tried, like automatically mailing out ballots, were rejected by the Arizona legislature. They also were trying to improve the clarity of voting instructions, especially those that were sent out with ballots, to reduce errors that people might make filling them out incorrectly or sealing them incorrectly and stuff like that. But they wanted to make sure those directions were clear, translated into different languages as necessary, and so forth. So there was a lot of work going up to the election to try to reduce impediments to voting, increase safety. And unfortunately, after the election, she was threatened during the counting process and so forth. I believe she was threatened personally, if I understand, and I think that was not isolated to Arizona. And throughout most of this, to my knowledge, Ducey has been, again, his leadership style is pretty quietly, and I'm not aware of him coming out with statements. He was, as of November 12th, he had not made any kind of public appearances. I think between November 12th and the certification, he did do a couple press conferences about COVID, but did not address the election, and unfortunately did not go to bat for his Secretary of State, as far as I'm aware. How much of that is his leadership style or his beliefs is kind of unclear, because again, he's been a quieter type of governor.
I see. And as far as I'm aware, he had just gone on vacation in November during much of this controversy.
Yes, before he made his first public. Sorry, I'm double checking the dates here, but I believe it was ABC 15 who said on November 12th he had not made a public appearance or comment since the election. They also noted he was on vacation, I think, for an anniversary, and he did a COVID press conference shortly after he got back. There was, I think it was reinforcing or reinstating restaurant limitations. I don't think his press conferences tend to be pretty short, and pretty focused. So I'm not aware of him addressing election topics then. And I think the main takeaways from that was to reinforce or reinstate restaurant quotas and to encourage use of patio heaters to reduce the amount of people in. And in my opinion, it was a missed opportunity to at least back his Secretary of State and encourage people not to threaten state officials.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially because Ducey bragged, or he used those words himself. That's not my words. He said he's bragged to President Trump. He even said, "I did this in the White House," about how bragged about Arizona's election infrastructure, how well it functioned, and so he kind of came in at the last minute and kind of took credit, while at the same time he really wasn't that present for it. So that was definitely an interesting part.
I want to be really cautious about assigning motivation, and this is consistent with his leadership style in general, as opposed to, again, someone like Brewer, who was very vocal. When things came up, she would be often, she'd weigh in. But yeah, I think there is a missed opportunity to be more communicative to Arizonans about what was going on and what to expect.
Yeah. Well, switching gears here, Arizona has traditionally been considered a Republican state. I mean, in most presidential elections, it goes red, and things have been changing though over the past few years, and unfortunately, it hasn't received the kind of national media attention that it should have. A lot of people have stereotyped Arizona as being kind of like Kansas, just deeply red, and it just isn't that way. I mean, there are a lot of people like Sheriff Joe Arpaio, have sort of a big presence in the national media, and so I think a lot of people sort of assume that that's how Arizonans think on the whole. You have Jan Brewer, she was a very conservative governor, the previous governor. And she had that moment, a very famous moment, where President Obama came off of Air Force One in Phoenix, and she wagged her finger at him. So a lot of people see that SB 1070, which was a bill related to, basically it was called like the check your papers law that basically allowed police to have extra powers with that. So there really is a national sense that Arizona is just extremely Republican. One interesting side note here is that when it comes to women's issues, Arizona's been very, very progressive as far as leadership. There've been actually, I think it was I forget if it was Jane Hull or Janet Napolitano, but Arizona was the first state in the country to have a female governor succeed another female governor. So that's just one little example. Right now, Arizona has 2 Democrat senators. I mean, these are facts that are just going totally against all the stereotypes about Arizona. And in fact, Kristen Sinema is the first openly bisexual U.S. senator. So there's the LGBTQ side to that. So why is it that everyone seems to think that Arizona is just a red state, that's all it is out here? Why do you think that happened?
I think it's always easy to simplify a story. I had to laugh a little bit when you compared Arizona to Kansas because I think that's a really good comparison. And I actually moved to Arizona from Kansas, so I moved from a red state to a red state, and yet in the last couple elections we've had some big changes in both those states. Kansas has a Democratic governor now for the first time in a long time, which was, if you had told me when I lived there was coming, I would have been very surprised. I would have asked for some of what you were having. Um, so I think I think from the outside it's very easy to say the leadership, the Arizona Senate has been dominated by Republicans. The senators have been Republicans. The governors have been Republicans. At the same time, some of those leaders have had more nuance than always gets coverage. Jan Brewer, on the one hand, did have was very fast to call out President Obama, but she also split from her with her party on healthcare issues a couple times, and took part in the opt Arizona into the national expansion. And I apologize, I cannot remember if it was Medicare or Medicaid, but she split with her party to push that through. So even some of the well-known Republican leaders from Arizona have. McCain is another good example because he was a staunch Republican who also had a reputation for working across the aisle, including with President-elect Biden. So I think if you look a little bit harder, you can see that there's been hints of a more complex story, of more nuance, even with some of the individuals involved who have seemed, even with some of the people who've seemed really red. Um, Arizona has a very mobile population. We've got a lot of universities. We've got students who come in and out. We have people who retire here. It's a very mobile state. It's a very fluid population. So those demographics play into who's voting and who's participating. But as they've been changing over time. Like even while I've been here, the demographics of who lives in the state are slowly changing as they are across the country. There has also been a lot of work by voter engagement activists to not just register voters, but to make sure that those voters to encourage those voters to participate in elections and to find out what the obstacles to participating in elections are and address those. We've seen that happen in numerous states, and we've seen the results come out in some pretty surprising ways. Shortly, I think it was, I apologize, I think it was the 2016 election where Roy Moore was defeated in Alabama. And that was attributed to a lot of grassroots work. And what I was hearing afterwards from what I saw going into the 2016 election in Arizona was a lot of grassroots efforts to address obstacles to voting, and I saw those continue through the 2018 election and began to hear from people studying Arizona politics who had watched them over time, people at the universities and so forth, that they were predicting in the next election or two that we would start to see some surprises like Alabama. And I heard that at the beginning of 2018, and in that election we saw our first Democratic senator, I believe, since the 90s or earlier. I'd have to double check, but we had gone decades without a Democratic senator, and we got one who ran against a military veteran who was very well known, which was a really interesting race, a really interesting result. It was not an expected result. So we've seen some indications that that more people are participating in Arizona politics, which is going to have an impact. And we've heard from voters who want, I think very consistently, we hear that people want bipartisanship approaches. When people are polled most people don't seem to like divisive politics. And for whatever reason in this election, um, Arizonans voted again. We now have 2 Democratic senators, and Arizona voted for a Democratic presidential nominee. I suspect it's a state in flux. I suspect that things will swing back and forth for a while, and I don't know where they'll settle. But it's kind of an exciting time to be living here. There's changes happening with the population, and there's more people getting to be engaged than have been before. And I think that's going to be, in the end, a good thing for the state, and it's going to be interesting to watch happen. Whatever ends up, whether the state ends up being a red state, a blue state, or a swing state, I think it's going to be good for the state to have more people involved.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, thank you very much for speaking with me. It was great hearing that update. Oh, one more thing. The Arizona legislature was shut down, right, due to COVID?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe the Arizona Capital Times, I'm going to double check the date here, announced it would be closing on Sunday, because when Giuliani was here shortly before, the timeline is a little strange as to when he took what test he took when and when he was positive, but he was here shortly before it was announced that he was positive for COVID, and we understand that people can be contagious before then. So I think it was Sunday that Arizona Capital Times announced that the that the AZ legislature would be closed. And if someone can fact check me on this, I cannot remember what source it was, but the legislators who were involved in the events he was at have been taking tests, and there's rumors that at least one of them might have had a positive result. And there's been pushback within the party. It's considered a controversial discussion, but they are closed currently because of Giuliani's visit. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for talking with me. Love to have you on in the future. You're really, really knowledgeable, Rebekah, on Arizona politics, national issues down here. You've covered the border. Yeah, it's great. And anyone watching, please subscribe here on HAPS. You can go to haps.tv. You could do, there are great sponsorship options. You can do a monthly subscription. You can do one-time donations. There's a buy me a coffee feature. So we really appreciate the support. It keeps independent journalists like us bringing these kind of reports to you. So thank you all for watching, and thank you, Rebekah, and keep on watching HAPS.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.